So, Mark, I've got a question for you. We've been incorporating the brain gauge into a lot of our programs for folks who are actually recovering from things like Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injuries, long COVID, and others, because it really gives us an awesome way to measure brain functions and train brain functions. But also, we've been embedding it into high performance programs for things like professional athletes and just even athletes of all levels to help with strength, endurance, and flexibility. Now, one of the things that we talk about and we promote is the cognitive reserves. And I want for you to take the opportunity to actually dive in and educate us a little bit about what that means. And if I am somebody who's recovering from any of these challenges or a professional athlete, what should I care about this cognitive reserve?
Sure. Okay, so that's I was trying to come up with slides for cognitive reserve, and every time I typed in and looked for slides for cognitive reserve, what popped up were pictures of environmental pictures and nature preserves. And I was like, God, that's not what I'm looking for. But then I started thinking about it. I was like, actually, that's a pretty good analogy. Is how do you preserve nature? How do you preserve the natural environment? How do you preserve your brain function? So a lot of the things that you do, you reduce toxins, things like that, to preserve your brain function, also apply. But in general, what you want to think about in terms of cognitive reserve is like, okay, again, let's go back to the analogy or the parallels between physical fitness and brain fitness. And who is more likely to get injured physically? Somebody who, a 90-pound, frail, elderly person, or somebody who is beefed up to 150, 200 pounds. And the answer is usually less likely to get hurt is the person who's bulked up and has much more muscle mass and isn't prone to fall for two reasons. Both their physical fitness is much well preserved, and generally your physical fitness is also going to help your mental acuity, and so you're going to be less likely to trip on the curb. But brain fitness is very similar to physical fitness that we talked about before. And what does cognitive reserve do? So again, if you get in an injury, you have done some brain training and your cognitive reserve is at its max, and let's say you get a mild concussion, you will recover faster. That's one of the benefits of cognitive reserve. If any kind of cognitive or any kind of neurological insult will have the same effect, you will recover quicker. A minor stroke, anything like a minor stroke, a minor head injury, even a pharmacological insult or a toxin, you'll get over it and you'll clean it up much quicker. So, that's really the way to think about it, is always think about the parallel with physical fitness, physical reserves, and who's less likely to get injured. And so basically what you want to do is build up your cognitive reserve, especially if you're an athlete and you're in sort of an athletic environment that's prone to concussion. We're not suggesting you go out and get concussions, but there's a chance that you'll bang your head if you're playing hockey or somebody with a stick or get in a fight or whatever. So you want to be at your peak performance for many reasons, not just a cognitive reserve reason, but because you want to be at peak athletic performance where you can make decisions faster, you can change directions quicker, things like that brain training will help that.
That's interesting. So it's almost like you have like a bank account, right? Where you have this energy, we call it optimal life force in brain mechanics, but you have this optimal life force built up in your brain capacity, right? Healing capacity, right? And I would imagine then that you're training it with a brain gauge, and we also help with that capacity by optimizing the brain's neurometabolism. So treating it like a muscle, so having more oxygen flowing through it, more mitochondrial health, and even factors that you need, just like you need factors for growing muscles, right? You need amino acids and things. So we focus on that. So it's really interesting. It's almost like a health trust account or something where something happens, you've got that vitality built up to rebuild. Is that right?
Right. You're building up your bank account, and you don't want to be running having your credit cards maxed out in case you have an emergency. You want to have a few dollars in the bank, and your credit card's paid off. It's the same thing.
That's so interesting. So it's almost, you could also apply the principle of compound debt or compound interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to the analogy of the forest, right, where you're eating junk food, you're not taking care of your sleep, you've got hormones, you've got a lot of stress build up and things like that build up in your brain. So those are like debt, right? And what most young people don't really realize, that at some point, we live our lives burning the candle at both ends, and at some point the bill comes. And when it does, it might be 20, 30 years of buildup of all these different reactions or this debt. At some point, the bill comes and we got to pay the debt. And people are scrambling, touching their wallets, going, how am I going to pay this, right? Because they don't have the cash to do that. And at that point, then, with a lot of programs with Smart Wellness that we have, we actually help them to rebuild that bank account again so they can apply into their healing, whether it's somebody who's got Lewy body dementia, Alzheimer's, or an athletic performance, where they need that extra juice, that extra power, and vitality or this cognitive reserves to actually have a well-functional brain.
Right. That's a great analogy. I mean, and the thing is, when you're burning the candle at both ends and you're stressed and, you're running on a deficit, that's when you make bad decisions that lead to more injuries. So, either physical or mental or brain injuries, the same. That's a great analogy.
And I love that this applies to a lot of the other things that the brain gauge, along with what we're doing in our programs, that actually improve the brain functions and reaction times and decision-making times, right? So it might not be such a critical thing if you're a population that's on the decline, but you do care about upgrading those things. But then also people who are high performers, like high-level executives, professional athletes, stockbrokers. If you actually can't make that right decision because your cognitive load is like a RAM and a CPU and a computer, right? Where the RAM, you don't have enough RAM, so your computer doesn't work really well. Well, you're taking up this cognitive reserve, you're using too much of your account, and then you don't have it to apply for everyday life. And that affects to all kinds of different brain functions, which really downstreams into things like loss of sleep, your hormonal imbalances, lack of impulse control, and everything else, because your circuit breaker in your brain is not working because it doesn't have the connections are not making the connection properly. And that's what I love about the brain gauge, that actually will reestablish those functions. It's like a circuit box. It'll just turn it on, and now that circuit can flow properly and all your functions.
Right. I mean, brain gauge, you just need to think about it in terms of being exercise equipment. And it's exercise equipment, and everyone knows physical activity helps improve brain activity, but the brain gauge is actually a physical device, and it crosses that barrier. So it crosses over and helps cross that sensory motor interface. So that interaction between physical and mental is really, really important.
Well, it's so cool because we also have quite a bit of more esoteric breath work and other practices. And a lot of the people in our community talk about the mind and body connection. Well, guess what? This is not woo-woo. We can actually measure the mind and body connection with brain gauge because it works that way. And that's what makes it so special, right? And we can train that mind-body connection. So if you're a professional athlete and you want to get into higher performance, these are training foundational building blocks of functionality that will help your performance no matter what you're doing. And that's what I love about it. It's almost like the Swiss Army knife of mind and body,
Exactly.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for taking the time to share with us and educating us more of the wonderful capacity of the brain gauge. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers.